Dublin's underworld has always had its codes and boundaries, an uneasy equilibrium between powerful criminal families. But in the mid-2010s, that fragile peace was shattered by an eruption of violence that would spill blood on the streets of Ireland and echo across the world. This is the story of the Kinahan Hutch Feud, a tale of betrayal, revenge, and a gangland war unlike any the country had seen. It begins with two men whose reputations loomed large over Dublin's crime landscape. On one side, Christy Kinahan, often called the Dapper Don, a shrewd and ambitious drug trafficker who built a sprawling cartel reaching from Dublin's inner city to the Costa del Sol and beyond. On the other, Gerard the Monk Hutch, a seasoned armed robber turned gang leader, known for his disciplined lifestyle and low profile despite a past filled with multi-million-dollar heists. For years, these two formidable figures operated in parallel, not friends, but not sworn enemies either. In fact, their families had once coexisted, even cooperated, in the shadows. One of Gary Hutch's own nephews had worked closely with the Kinahan crew abroad. There was an unspoken understanding that as long as territories were respected and business remained separate, open conflict could be avoided. Yet in the underworld, trust is a scarce commodity. Small frictions can fester and rumors can kill. By 2014, dark whispers were circling within the Kinahan cartel about a mole in their midst. Suspicion fell on Gary Hutch, Jerry's nephew, who had spent years in Spain as part of Daniel Kinahan's trusted circle. Gary was streetwise and well-liked, but suddenly his loyalty was in question. There were murmurs that he had double-crossed the Kinahans, that he might have leaked information to police or even tried to assassinate a senior Kinahan lieutenant. Whether these allegations were true or false mattered little. In the ruthless calculus of Gangland, the mere whiff of betrayal sealed Gary's fate. A deadly decision was made. Gary Hutch had to be eliminated. The reckoning came on a warm morning in late September 2015 on the sun-baked coast of Spain. Gary Hutch, 34 years old, stepped out into the courtyard of a quiet apartment complex in Miraflores, near Marbella, where he lived. He had no inkling that the friendship and protection he once enjoyed had curdled into deadly intent. As he went about his routine, the silence was broken by the sudden appearance of an armed man. In a heartbeat, Gary realized he was in the crosshairs. He ran, terror spurring him through the corridors and past the swimming pool, desperately searching for an escape. Cornered and unarmed, Gary raised his hands and pleaded for his life. But mercy was a luxury his hunter did not have. A volley of gunshots cracked through the late morning air. When the echoes died away, Gary Hutch lay lifeless on the ground. News of the murder spread fast. In Dublin's gangland circles, the message was unmistakable. The Kinahans had dealt a harsh sentence to one of their own who they believed betrayed them. But in carrying out this execution, they had lit the fuse on a feud that would soon engulf both families. Back in Dublin's north inner city, Jerry the Monk Hutch and his clan were devastated. Gary wasn't just a lieutenant, he was family. For months prior, the Hutches had tried everything to save him. They had negotiated with Christy Kinahan himself, imploring that Gary be spared. According to underworld rumor, they even paid the Kinahan gang a king's ransom, hundreds of thousands of euro, and offered up a form of penance. One of Gary's brothers reportedly volunteered to take a non-lethal bullet as an act of contrition, a symbolic punishment to appease the Kinahans. But if any deal was struck, it was callously broken. The Kinahans took the money, took the blood payment, and then took Gary's life regardless. To the Hutch family, it was the ultimate betrayal. The Kinahan faction didn't stop at Gary. Their appetite for retribution seemed insatiable. In the weeks after the Marbella shooting, ominous incidents back in Ireland signaled that more violence was coming. Gary's younger brother, Derek Delboy Hutch, was stabbed and beaten inside a Dublin prison where he was serving time. A bounty rumored to have been placed on his head by Christy Kinahan himself. Derek survived these jailhouse attacks by a hair's breadth. Then, on a cold December night just after Christmas 2015, a Hutch associate named Darren Kearns stepped out of a Chinese restaurant in Dublin with his wife, only to be ambushed and shot dead in front of her. It was believed Kearns had been involved in a botched attempt to target Kinahan men weeks earlier. Now he paid the price with his life. By the dawn of 2016, what had been a simmering resentment exploded into all-out war. Gary Hutch knew he was a marked man. He slipped out of Ireland, keeping to the shadows abroad to avoid the inevitable hit that was coming. But even away from home, he wasn't safe. On New Year's Eve 2015, in the holiday nightlife of Lanzarote in the Canary Islands, the monk had a brush with death. He departed a local pub just minutes before masked gunmen stormed in looking for him. They were too late. Their prey had vanished into the night. The narrow escape only steeled Gary Hutch's resolve. If the Kinahans were bringing the fight to his doorstep, he would answer in kind. February 5th, 2016. A crisp Friday afternoon in Dublin. At the Regency Hotel near the city's north side, a crowd gathered for a boxing weigh-in event. It was meant to be a routine press affair before a big fight night, organized in part by none other than Daniel Kinahan, Christie's son and heir apparent to the Kinahan Empire. The hotel lobby and conference area buzzed with chat of tickets and titles. But among the attendees moved figures with a far deadlier purpose. Shortly before 2:30 p.m., pandemonium erupted. A group of armed men, some disguised head to toe as elite Garda Irish police in tactical uniforms, burst into the hotel, brandishing AK-47 assault rifles. In the frenzy, people dived for cover behind tables and potted plants, confusion and terror surging through the crowd. These gunmen were not there by accident. They were targeting the Kinahan leadership attending the event. Their primary mark, Daniel Kinahan himself. What followed was like a scene from a crime thriller played out in real life. As cameras and phones recorded the chaos, bullets flew. One of Daniel Kinahan's closest associates, 34-year-old David Byrne, tried to flee through the lobby amid the screaming bystanders. Gunfire caught him, and he collapsed to the marble floor. The hit squad swept through the area, firing shots and sending spectators scrambling in every direction. Daniel Kinahan barely escaped with his life, bolting out of the hotel in the commotion. Within minutes, the assailants, carrying their weapons and dressed as fake police, disappeared, leaving shock and carnage behind. The Regency Hotel attack was over almost as quickly as it began, but its impact was immense. David Byrne lay dead, and news of the daring assault spread like wildfire. The Regency Hotel bloodbath was a direct strike at the Kinahans, an attempt by the Hutch side to cripple their rivals' power. But it missed the main target, and in doing so, it unleashed a storm. The Kinahan cartel's response was swift and merciless. Just 3 days later, on February 8, 2016, as Ireland was still reeling from the hotel attack, images splashed across the news. The Kinahans hit back. Eddie Hutch Sr., Jerry's older brother, was at home on Dublin's North Strand that evening when a group of gunmen forced their way in. Eddie, a 59-year-old taxi driver who had kept a low profile, was brutally gunned down in his own hallway. The assassination of the monk's brother sent an unmistakable signal that nobody in the Hutch family was off limits. From that moment, a grim pattern set in. Month after month, the streets of Dublin would witness cold-blooded murders as the feud gathered momentum. In March 2016, Noel King-Size Duggan, a 55-year-old smuggler and close friend of Gary Hutch, was shot dead outside his home in County Meath. His body slumped inside his car. Duggan's execution showed that even long-time associates of the Hutches, men with no direct role in the Regency attack, were now targets for elimination. The violence only escalated as spring turned to summer. On April 14, 2016, an afternoon burst of gunfire on Sheriff Street in Dublin's north inner city left bystanders scattering and one man dead on the pavement. The victim, 24-year-old Martin O'Rourke, was an innocent father of 3, tragically mistaken for a Hutch gang member by Kinahan hitmen hunting their prey in broad daylight. The real target escaped, but O'Rourke paid with his life, underscoring how indiscriminate the carnage had become. Less than 2 weeks later, the Kinahans struck again. On April 25th, Michael Barr, a pub manager with Republican ties who was suspected of aiding the Hutch side in the Regency attack, was tending bar at the Sunset House pub when armed men burst in. In a flash of violence, Barr was shot multiple times and killed behind his own counter. His murder removed yet another perceived ally of the Hutch faction. Then, on the morning of May 24, 2016, the war claimed a high-profile casualty from the Hutch family itself. Gareth Hutch, a 35-year-old nephew of Jerry, was getting into his car outside his apartment in Dublin's north inner city when two gunmen approached. In a desperate scramble, Gareth tried to shield himself, even raising his hand as if to ward off bullets. But it was no use. He was shot dead at the scene. The killing, captured on CCTV cameras, showed the brazen confidence of the assassins, who vanished amid the city traffic. By the midsummer of 2016, the tally of dead was rising, and each murder seemed bolder than the last. July brought another horror. On the 1st of that month, 54-year-old David Douglas was working at the counter of his small shop on Bridgefoot Street when a hitman walked up and opened fire. Douglas, a longtime Hutch associate known to be friendly with the earlier victim Darren Kearns, collapsed mortally wounded as the shooter fled. Once again, the Kinahan gang was exacting revenge for past slights. They believed Douglas had a hand in the attempt on their men the year before, and now he was gone. Even vacationers were not safe from the spreading violence. On August 17, 2016, Trevor O'Neill, a 41-year-old Dublin City Council worker, was strolling on a sunny street in Mallorca, Spain, enjoying a holiday with his wife and children. In an instant, a gunman crept up and shot him in cold blood as Trevor's family watched in horror. The killers had mistaken Trevor for their actual mark, a Hutch associate who was nearby. In the eyes of the Kinahan assassins, it hardly mattered. Any friend of the Hutches was disposable. The slaying of an innocent tourist on foreign soil showed just how far this feud's terror reached. As 2016 drew to a close, the relentless bloodletting continued. In late December, as families gathered for Christmas, one family was left in tatters by yet another hit. Noel Duck Egg Kerwin, a 62-year-old retired taxi driver and a lifelong friend of Gary Hutch, became the feud's next victim. On December 22nd, Kerwin sat in his car outside his partner's home in Clondalkin, West Dublin, when a gunman approached and fired several shots through the window. Kerwin died there in the driver's seat, his festive shopping scattered and blood seeping onto the street. He had no criminal involvement. His only offense in the eyes of the killers was loyalty to the Hutch family. The murder of Kerwin, an ordinary man, was a stark reminder. The Kinahan Hutch feud was cutting down not just gangsters, but anyone tied, however loosely, to either side. After the frenzy of 2016, the new year brought a brief and uneasy lull. The start of 2017 saw no immediate bloodshed. A welcome relief, perhaps due in part to an intensified Garda crackdown. The Irish police had formed a special task force dedicated to the feud, pouring officers and resources into Dublin's Gangland quarters to stop the cycle of revenge. They increased armed checkpoints, surveilled suspects day and night, and intercepted weapons destined for assassination plots. For a few months, it seemed the storm might be calming. But that hope was shattered in the late spring. On May 31, 2017, the feud ignited again. Early that morning, 37-year-old Michael Keogh got into his car in the underground parking garage of his apartment complex on Dorset Street. Keogh had known connections to the Kinahan group, and he likely never saw his killer approach. Two silenced shots to the head ended his life in an instant. His body was discovered slumped in the driver's seat, the engine still running. This murder broke the 5-month ceasefire, and unlike most others, it appeared to be a strike from the Hutch side against a Kinahan loyalist, a rare act of retaliation. The message was that Gary Hutch's faction, though battered, was not entirely finished and could still bite back. If the Hutches celebrated that small victory, it was short-lived. The Kinahans continued their relentless campaign. In the weeks around Keogh's death, Garda quietly thwarted other planned hits. In one operation in April 2017, an international hitman hired by the Kinahan cartel, a former Estonian sniper, was arrested in a Dublin safehouse along with 2 local associates before they could carry out a murder assignment. And in May, just days before Keogh was killed, another Hutch associate named James Margot Gately narrowly survived an attempt on his life. Gately was sitting in his car at a petrol station when a gunman pumped 5 bullets into him. Miraculously, Gately lived, saved by a bulletproof vest, but he was left gravely wounded. These foiled and failed hits showed both the reach of the Kinahans and the vigilance of law enforcement battling to contain the feud. As 2017 wore on, the feud's tempo was slower than the previous year, but no less deadly. In October 2017, a young man with ties to the Hutches, 24-year-old Jamie Tig Ennis, was shot to death on a residential street in North Dublin. He had been friendly with members of the Hutch gang, and for that association alone, he was marked and eliminated. Then, in December, a chilling coda to the year unfolded. Kane McCormack, only 24 years old, the son of a murdered Hutch associate, vanished after telling his partner he was stepping out to meet someone. He never returned home. Within a day, his body was found dumped in a field in County Meath. A single gunshot wound to his head. The Kinahan side was suspected in luring Kane to his death, snuffing out yet another young life tied to the Hutch family. The once tight-knit Hutch clan was being picked apart, branch by branch. By early 2018, even more extreme violence erupted. On January 20, 2018, another nephew of Gary Hutch met a brutal end. 27-year-old Derek Coakley. Hutch was sitting in a car at the Bridgeview halting site near Clover Hill Prison when two gunmen crept up and opened fire through the windows. Derek was killed instantly, mere minutes after he had visited his brother in the nearby prison. 10 days later, mourners gathering to pay respects to Derek would witness yet another murder. Jason Buda Molyneux, a 27-year-old friend and ally of the Hutch family, attended Derek's wake on January 30th. That night, as Jason walked near his home at the James Larkin House Flats, a car pulled up and a gunman shot him multiple times. He died steps away from where he lived, and just hours after saying goodbye to his fallen friend. The audacity of murdering a man on the day of a funeral struck fear even in hardened gangland observers. One Irish crime journalist grimly observed that this was no longer a feud. It is a wipeout. The Kinahan cartel seemed intent on eradicating the Hutch contingent entirely. The onslaught continued into the spring of 2018, accompanied by psychological warfare. In March, residents in the Hutch family's neighborhood awoke to find menacing graffiti sprayed on walls near the Hutch home base. In big black letters it read, "Patsy dies, feud ends." Patsy Hutch, Jerry's brother, had long been suspected as a key target, the supposed mastermind who the Kinahans wanted to eliminate. The graffiti was effectively a public death threat, an attempt to draw Patsy out or intimidate the Hutches into submission. Guard increased protection around Patsy, who went into hiding. The brazen message only highlighted how deeply personal and vicious this war had become. Through late 2018, murders directly linked to the feud finally began to taper off, but not before a few final twists. On a dark evening in November 2018, 50-year-old Clive Staunton was shot dead as he packed up his van after selling flags and scarves outside a football match. Clive was a distant acquaintance of the Hutch family. The hit's motive was murky. Some underworld whispers said Clive had inadvertently angered someone on the Kinahan side, but his death was logged as another casualty of the feud's chaos. And on December 22, 2018, precisely 2 years to the day after the murder of Noel Kerwin, the feud claimed what would be its last known victim. 34-year-old Eric Fowler was assassinated outside his home in West Dublin, shot in the head by waiting gunmen. Fowler had been aligned with the Kinahan faction, and rumors later hinted that his own comrades might have executed him over suspicions of disloyalty. Whether an internal settling of scores or a strike by Hutch sympathizers, Fowler's killing underscored the toxic atmosphere of suspicion the feud had created. In just over 2 years, from late 2015 to the end of 2018, the Hutch-Kinahan feud had claimed at least 18 lives in Ireland and Spain. The vast majority of the dead were from the Hutch side or their circle of friends. Several were completely uninvolved in crime, caught in the storm solely because of where they lived or who they knew. Whole communities in Dublin's north inner city lived in fear that they might be in the wrong place if a hit went down. Funerals became all too frequent, with families sobbing over coffins and pleading for the madness to stop. "Nobody deserves to die like this," one relative begged at a service, calling for an end to the bloodshed. But on the streets, the cycle of retribution had taken on a life of its own, beyond any one person's control. All the while, law enforcement worked feverishly to stem the violence. By mid-2018, Gardaí seized hundreds of firearms, millions in cash, and staggering quantities of drugs from the crime groups. They quietly foiled around 50 planned assassinations. operations where hitmen were intercepted en route or weapons stashes were raided before they could be used. Over 60 people from both gangs were arrested as detectives built cases against gunmen and masterminds alike. Special armed units patrolled Dublin's streets, a visible deterrent that likely saved more lives. These efforts undoubtedly prevented the death toll from soaring even higher. Yet for all the police pressure, the feud only truly slowed when there were few targets left standing. By 2019, the frenzy of killings had subsided. The Hutch family was devastated and largely vanquished on the streets. The Kinahan side, though victorious in body count, was under unprecedented pressure from law enforcement. The open warfare simmered down, leaving a tense and fragile calm in Dublin's Gangland. Gary Hutch was still alive, but he remained in hiding overseas, acutely aware that if he surfaced, he would be the ultimate prize for the Kinahans' revenge. And the Kinahans, for their part, had begun looking over their shoulders, not just for enemies with guns, but for agents with badges. As the feud's fires cooled at home, the focus shifted to dismantling the criminal empires behind it. Police forces in Ireland, the UK, and beyond intensified their collaboration to crush the Kinahan cartel's drug and gun-running network. In early 2019, a major breakthrough struck the Kinahans. Their close associate and logistics chief, Thomas "Bomber" Kavanagh, was arrested and later sentenced to a long prison term in England for arms trafficking. Around the same time in Dublin, the Special Criminal Court convicted and jailed several Kinahan henchmen for feud-related murders, including the notorious hitman Freddie Thompson, who received a life sentence for the killing of David Douglas. One by one, key players who had fueled the mayhem were being removed from the board. Meanwhile, Christy Kinahan and his sons had retreated to the luxuries of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, hoping to evade capture and continue their operations from afar. But in April 2022, the Kinahan family's haven turned into a spotlight. In a rare show of force against an Irish gang, the United States government sanctioned the Kinahan organized crime group and publicly named Christy, Daniel, and Christopher Jr. as the leaders of a global narcotics and money laundering network. The US Treasury froze any of their assets it could find and, in a dramatic announcement, offered a $5 million reward for information leading to their arrest or the disruption of their enterprise. At a news conference in Dublin, US officials compared the Kinahan to the great crime syndicates of Italy and Asia, declaring them targets on a world stage. Overnight, the Kinahan name became toxic. The high-flying clan found bank accounts closed, luxury accommodations scrutinized, and international travel made nearly impossible. Daniel Kinahan, who had reinvented himself as a boxing promoter dealing with some of the sport's biggest names, saw that carefully crafted image collapse. Champions and trainers who once sought his advice now publicly distanced themselves. The Kinahans were finding themselves with fewer places to hide. Back in Ireland, even as the Kinahans were squeezed financially and legally, the authorities were closing the book on the Regency Hotel attack that had so ignited the feud. Garda investigators had long suspected that Gary Hutch was one of the orchestrators of the daring assault at the Regency. For years, Hutch evaded their grasp, moving quietly between safe houses in Europe and keeping a low profile. But as 2021 dawned, his time ran out. Acting on a European arrest warrant, Spanish police tracked down the monk on the Costa del Sol. On August 12, 2021, in a small restaurant in Fuengirola, Gary Hutch was surrounded and arrested without incident. After a brief legal battle, he was extradited back to Ireland to stand trial for the murder of David Byrne. The trial that followed in late 2022 was like a final act in the feud's drama. With heavy security in place and a swarm of reporters watching, Gary Hutch, then approaching his 60s, sat in the dock of Dublin's Special Criminal Court, accused of orchestrating the Regency attack. The prosecution's case leaned on secret audio recordings and the testimony of a former Hutch confidant turned state witness, Jonathan Dowdall. Dowdall, a one-time city councillor with no prior gangland pedigree, had gotten entangled with the Hutch crew and allegedly assisted in the Regency plot. Caught and facing charges himself, he agreed to testify against his old associate. During the trial, the court heard how Hutch and Dowdall met in the aftermath of the hotel shooting, whispering about the heat and allegedly discussing getting rid of weapons. It was a sensational reversal. the monk's supposed ally, was now damning him in open court. For months, Ireland held its breath as evidence was laid out. Many wondered if the state could succeed in a conviction or if the legendary monk would slip through the cracks once more. In April 2023, the three-judge panel delivered their verdict. Not guilty. Gary Hutch was acquitted of murder, the judges citing insufficient corroboration of the key witness's account and a lack of direct evidence tying Hutch to the gunman at the Regency. After spending almost 2 years behind bars awaiting the outcome, Gary Hutch walked free, smiling faintly as he exited the court into the cool spring air. 2 lesser-known accomplices were convicted for aiding the hit team, men who had provided getaway vehicles, but the alleged mastermind was now a free man. His freedom, however, came with an asterisk. Outside the court, Hutch was a public figure again, a gangland titan who had seemingly outmaneuvered both rivals and the justice system. The question loomed: would the Kinahans seek retribution now that the monk was back in play? Gardaí certainly weren't taking chances. They discreetly maintained surveillance on Hutch, partly to deter any assassination attempt and partly to monitor his activities. In the weeks following his acquittal, locals spotted Gary Hutch around Dublin, even casually riding a motorbike through the city streets. To some, it was astonishing. After all the carnage and threats, here he was, appearing as if life had returned to normal. But Hutch knew better than to linger. In May 2023, barely a month after his acquittal, he slipped out of Ireland and flew back to Spain, where he had long kept properties and business interests. Whether he went to settle affairs or simply to lay low was unclear. What was certain was that a return to his old neighborhood carried risks he wasn't willing to take. Today, the Kinahan Hutch feud has largely moved from the streets to the courtrooms and boardrooms of international policing. Its violent chapter has, for now, closed. Dublin is not witnessing the relentless cycle of murder that terrorized its inner city a few years ago. The feud's endgame was not a dramatic shootout, but a slow attrition. One side practically exterminated and the other hounded across the globe by law enforcement. Yet in the underworld, grudges die hard. Gary the monk Hutch, now in his 60s, lives life as a free man, but one who can never fully relax. He will always be watching his back, knowing that time and distance might not erase the Kinahans' desire for vengeance. Christy Kinahan and his sons remain fugitives from the law, their empire curtailed, but not entirely dismantled. They too look over their shoulders, albeit for different reasons, wary of arrest warrants and bounty hunters spurred by that €5 million reward. In Dublin's gangland law, the Kinahan Hutch feud has already taken on a dark legend. It was a war with no winners, only widows and orphans, shattered families and scarred communities. It forced the Irish government to bolster its fight against organised crime, introduced new levels of international cooperation against mobsters, and even brought the weight of American sanctions down on an Irish cartel, something unimaginable before. The feud stands as a grim testament to how personal animosities within the criminal world can erupt into communal tragedy. For the ordinary people of Dublin, the hope is that this chapter is finally closed, that the cycle of reprisal has burned itself out. And indeed, with so many of those who pulled triggers or ordered hits now imprisoned or dead, the appetite for continued violence appears to have waned. As of now, peace, or something like it, persists. But it is an uneasy peace, held in place by the ghosts of 18 lives lost and the watchful eye of Gardaí and international agencies. The Kinahan Hutch feud has left an indelible mark on Ireland. It changed the face of organised crime in the country and proved that even the mightiest crime lords can be brought low, whether by a rival's bullet or a judge's gavel. The story of this feud is a cautionary tale of underworld betrayal and revenge spiralling out of control. It serves as a stark reminder that in the violent twilight world of gangland, once a cycle of vengeance begins, it can consume all in its path, until nothing is left but grief and the long, hard work of rebuilding lives in its wake.